Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. We're going to be talking about something that's no longer theoretical, the evolution of the Security Operations Center. The shift from reactive defense to autonomous response is no longer a future concept. It's happening now. And for many organizations, it's not about whether to evolve, it's about how fast. Before we begin, if you require live interpretation, please select your preferred language using the interpretation menu on the screen. Once selected, your audio will switch automatically. I'll give anyone a couple of seconds to quickly set that up. Also, before we move forward, a couple of quick notes to make during the session. First, feel free to drop questions into the chat at any point during the presentation, and Simran and I will address the questions at the end during the Q&A period. Secondly, we'll be launching a live poll shortly, and I'll encourage everyone to participate. It helps us ground the discussion in real-world realities, answer your questions, get a clearer picture of where your organizations are at today, and it makes the conversation more valuable because it's more realistic to what's happening in the organizations today. And with that, let's get started. My name is Diana Goves, and I'm the Vice President overseeing the PMO, GRC, and ServiceNow teams at Bell Cyber. My role allows me to work closely with both the security teams in our CIC and our clients, and I get to see firsthand where processes break down, where automation helps, and where it's driving measurable impact. Today, I'll be moderating the discussion and helping to connect the strategic lens with the technical depth you're going to see in the next section. I'm very pleased to also introduce you to Simran, our manager of the Cybersecurity Innovation Center, who will walk us through the architecture and live use cases. Simran, over to you.
Thank you, Diana, for the introduction. Hello, everyone. My name is Simran Jyotikti. I have been working in cybersecurity for around 8 years, and I started where many of us start, which is inside the SOC. So during after-hour shifts, living in dashboards, chasing alerts, and writing tickets while trying to keep up with the pace of incidents. So over time, I moved into top-tier role of handling top-tier customers, later becoming a team lead, handling major investigations and supporting the analysts through high-pressure situations. And one thing became obvious to me was the hardest part wasn't always detecting something suspicious. It was the time lost after detections, where we were doing manual enrichments, the repeated pivots, switching tools, documenting everything, and as well as we're trying to coordinate everything with fast response. Now, that's what pushed me into a use case architect role, where I was focused on building detections that work in the real world. Which was basically reducing the noise, improving the confidence, and making response more consistent. And now, in my current innovation manager role, my focus is developing innovative and customized use cases where we specialize in automation, AI-driven detections that enable autonomous responses, so we can contain threats at machine speed while making analyst life easier and SOC operations more efficient. So I'm coming at this from both the sides. I have done the work manually in the SOC and now focusing on designing the automations that remove the repetitive steps and help teams to respond faster. So we have a packed agenda for today. I'm going to try to make it a little bit interesting. So we will start by setting the context, which is why SOCs are falling behind, what the modern SOC reality look like day to day. Then we will walk through the maturity journey, how teams evolve from reactive and manual to automated, and then eventually to the controlled autonomy, and plus what human plus AI really means. After that, we will go through some real use case examples so you can see how containment shifts from hours, sometimes days, to minutes. And then we will connect it to outcomes. What improves in measurable terms, followed by quick readiness check, a simple, quick 90-day roadmap in terms of where to get started. And then we will wrap up with for future discussions and leave the time for Q&A. So before we jump into tools and techniques, I want to start with a simple reality check, which is security operations today are falling behind. Now, it's not because the teams aren't skilled, but because the system around them is broken. Now, most SOCs are still stuck in manual process, which is triaging through spreadsheets, copy pasting the investigations, and all the approvals that slows everything down. And I remember doing this when I started as an after hour shift, doing all those work manually. And at the same time, we are dealing with the alert overload. Now, hundreds or thousands of alerts that look important, but only a fraction of them are important. And even when we have good tooling, it's often siloed. Now, the SIM doesn't talk cleanly to endpoint, doesn't enrich with threat intel, and response becomes just a chain of handoffs. So even with the best tools, um, it's still lacking in the coming up with the full story. And all of that leads to one outcome we all feel, which is containment is too slow. Now, it's not because teams don't care, not because the process isn't built for the speed. And now here's the mismatch. Now, attackers automate in seconds. Now, we have the AI they are using to automate the attacks in seconds, while the SOCs are still investigating in hours, and the containment needs to be in the minutes. So the gap is where risk lives because every extra minute spent validating and coordinating is a minute the attacker is still active. So the question isn't dramatic, it's practical. Can your SOC contain ransomware in under 5 minutes? Now, because ransomware doesn't wait for a ticket to be assigned, it doesn't wait for a shift handover, it doesn't wait for someone to correlate the logs manually. And that's the gap we are going to focus on today. How to move from slow manual response to fast, consistent containment without burning out our analysts or drowning in false positives. So before I share on what I see across most environments, I want to quick ground this in the reality, and let's do a quick poll. You will see a pop-up on your screen asking how long does your SOC currently take to contain a ransomware incident? Keep in mind not to detect, it's about contain, meaning isolating the host, stopping the spread, block the activity, and breaking the attack change. So you can pick the option that closest to what happens in your world and where it's based on metrics or maybe just a real experiences. So I'll give a few seconds here for everyone to take up the poll, and then we'll take it from there. Okay, all right. We are seeing some responses coming in. Okay, all right. So I'm seeing like the top answer is coming around the more than 4 hours. And honestly, what I have seen is common. It's sometimes it's like the 4 hours is like best case scenario. I have seen where it has been time more than that. But let's put that into the perspective. Now, ransomware can turn a single endpoint issue into an enterprise-wide outage in that same window. It can spread laterally in seconds. It can exfiltrate data before your first escalation call is even scheduled. So if the containment takes more than 4 hours or even more than that, the attackers isn't just inside, they are operating freely at this point. And this isn't the people problem. This is where it's the process problem, it's the tooling problem, and the speed problem. So as the poll result makes sense, if most of us are seeing 4+ hours for the containment, the next question is why? What's actually stretching that timeline? Now, it usually comes down to 4 pressures happening at the same time. So first is like too much noise. A big portion of alerts are low fidelity. So analysts spend time proving something is not an incident. That slows everything down before the responses even begins. The second is the work is repetitive. Now, tier one investigations often follow the same steps again and again. Checking the user, checking the host, checking the login activity. If it's a EDR related incidents, checking the process activity, was there any malicious network connections, checking the reputations. And to do all this, pivoting across multiple tools. And when doing all this, which is a necessary work, doing it manually every time, it creates the hours of delay. Third is the burnout, where when the day is dominated by noise and repetition, analysts fatigue fast. So even the experienced people, when they're rotating the shifts, the speeds drop even more. And because the fast response depends upon consistency and the pattern recognition. And finally, the AI-powered attacks. Now, adversaries are moving faster than ever. Now, they're shrinking the time between initial access and the real impact. So what used to take days can now happen in hours and even sometimes less. So when we combine the noise, the repetitive work, the burnout, and fast attackers, the containment time we saw in the poll becomes almost inevitable. So the real question here is, what does progress look like? How do SOC move from manual reactive response to fast containment that's consistent and safe? And a helpful way to think about it is as the maturity journey, where each step removes the friction and increases the speed. So first is where many teams starts, which is the reactive operations. So this is where the mostly the SOC begin with, which is the manual triage. Now we are triaging it manually with all the static rules, constant alert fatigue, and the system is depending upon humans to do the heavy lifting every single time. The next step is the automation. Now, typically through playbooks and predefined workflows. So this is where we start the shaving time off by automating repeatable tasks, which is by enriching the incident, by ticket routing, doing the basic containment actions, and standard response steps. So these are the few steps that we can take from first being the reactive model to the automated SOC. Then comes the AI augmentation. Now, this is where we stop treating every alert equally and start doing risk-based prioritizations. Now, the focus shifts from what triggered to what and why it matters, using context, entity behavior, and correlation, which will help to guide the analyst to do the right incidents first. And then finally, the final stage of the autonomous operations. Now, this isn't about replacing the humans. This is where the AI and humans gonna work together in a closed loop to take the remediations for specific scenarios where confidence is high. Now, think of it as security that can self-correct quickly, detect, validate, respond, and document, where we are not waiting for hours or any manual steps. Now, the goal isn't to jump to the far right overnight. The goal is to move one step forward, and starting the work that's slowing you down the most is where you begin with. So you take like a phase approach, and moving from reactive SOC, then you move to automated, where you just automate the repetitive steps, then AI augmented SOC with the AI doing the initial analysis, and the autonomous SOC, which combines the AI analysis and the containment. So now the real power comes, like I talked about in the autonomous SOC, when humans and AI, they work together and not separately. Now, AI takes care of all the noise, so our analyst can focus on what actually matters, like real threats, not any irrelevant alerts. Now, by automating correlation and enrichment, we move from basic triage to true proactive threat hunting. And everything the AI does is all transparent and auditable, which ensures trust, compliance, and continuous improvement. So when humans and AI they work together, response becomes faster and more consistent. AI will accelerate the investigation, and humans make the right call quickly so that we can have the incident process working in the right directions. Now, whenever we talk about autonomy, the very next question is always, okay, but how do we make sure the automation doesn't do something dangerous? So I usually like to put this in a traffic light analogy because it's simple and it's intuitive. And honestly, it matches how a mature SOC should operate. Now, let's start with the green because green is where we win the time. This is where we have high confidence, which means that because we are seeing multiple signals that agree in terms of, let's just say, identity or the endpoint, the email, network. So it gives us the full story and not just the one alert. This is where we can auto execute safe, which means we can reverse the actions also. But this is where we shift from investigation first to containment first, because attackers don't wait for ticket queues. And a few examples of the green actions can be, for example, temporarily isolating the endpoint. Now, when we're talking about the endpoint, like any workstations, it won't take the actions on the servers, which are the critical decisions. Revoking the user sessions, not disabling the user sessions, because that sometimes become more critical. By revoking the sessions, it will just reinforce them to re-authenticate through the multi-factor or quarantining the malicious emails. The other steps can be blocking the high severity malicious domains or IPs or hashes. So those are the action items that can be taken in terms of the containment first. So now here is what the green is, like we call about in the analogy is, we have already decided the action are safe and automation is just going to help us execute faster. And like I remember when I was an analyst in the SOC working on the tickets, I could recognize the suspicious behavior very quickly. But the pain was the time that was spent in like tool switching, enriching the tickets, uh, doing all the documentations and going through the approvals. So this helps to remove that delay for action that we already trust. Now, the next one is the yellow, which means slow down and validate. Now, this is the zone where it looks suspicious, but context matters, or you don't yet have enough evidence to safely automate the containment. So the system will still do the heavy lifting, which is doing the correlation, it's enriching the context. It will provide the summary of what happened, creating a storyline, and as well as providing the recommendations in terms of the best action. But a human approves before anything is executed. So this is where I have spent most of my time again when working in the SOC. And I used to be thinking, I'm pretty sure this is malicious, but I need one more pivot, like, maybe before I hit the button or before we pick up a phone call, meaning keeping the human judgment in the loop. So while reducing the repetitive work, which causes the fatigue, meaning automation or AI, is doing the initial level of triage, doing the correlation, and we as humans just making the right decision. So it helps us to take the correct decisions quicker. And then it's the red, which is the critical actions. Now, these are the actions with high business impact, high blast radius, or hard to reverse the consequences. It can be anything like talked about disabling critical service accounts or isolating any critical servers in the environment. It can be like adding the organization-wide firewall or router changes, adding any permanent blocks or any mass remediations. So all of these actions are where the governance lives, and which is the change control, coordination, and among teams that needs the senior sign-offs. So honestly, when you're working towards the journey of the autonomous SOC, defining red or defining the high risk is very important. So once the red is clearly defined, it makes everyone comfortable about the green, which is knowing the business, that which are the things we can auto execute with any high impact actions. So if you think of the autonomy as a single switch, it definitely feels risky. But if you think of it as like a traffic light system, it becomes operationally safe. So green is where you can auto execute the safe actions, yellow is the recommended along with the approvals, and red is where we monitor the high impact decisions. And that's how you move fast without losing any control. So now that we are aligned on the principle, the AI takes care of scale and speed, while humans keep control and the judgment, the next step is how do we operationalize that here at Bell Cyber? Now, this is where the design matters. The first, everything is built around an integrated security mesh, meaning signals from endpoint, the network, identity, the cloud platforms, all other security tools, they all are integrated, which comes together and shares a single story, not 4 or 5 different separate investigations that the analysts need to go through and combine them. Since with the mesh, all are correlated among each other, and that's how you get to the fast correlation and high confidence decisions. Second, it supports the co-managed model. Third is the automation first. Now, not automation for the sake of it, but the automation which is targeted at the repetitive steps. For example, like we talked about enrichment, doing the correlations, the case creations, all of this with the controlled response actions with the guardrails. And finally, for organizations with strict requirements, hosting also matters. The data residency and sovereignty are built in, so you can move fast without creating the governance problems. Now, big takeaway is we are not talking about adding AI, we're talking about a design where AI plus automation can actually execute safely across the full attack surface. Now, let me make this concrete with 2 real-world detection scenarios. So we'll go around to 2 examples. One would be the compromised VPN and lateral movement, and one around malicious email and risky sign-in behavior. Now, I'm going to frame this using a simple comparison, like how does it look like in a traditional SOC, the challenges that are faced in the traditional SOC. And mostly it's not about that we're not getting the alerts. The main challenge is what happens after the alert, which is the how validations are being done, how the correlations are being done, when it's executing the containment actions across multiple tools. And when those steps are manual and scattered, the overall incident process naturally stretches into the hours. And in the comparison to the traditional SOC is the how it looks in the autonomous or the AI-powered SOC approach, where the goal is different in terms of detect fast, correlate instantly, and contain within the minutes, while still keeping all the actions controlled and auditable. So with each use case, listen for 2 things where the time is lost in the manual path and what gets automated to bring the containment under 5 minutes. So let's start with the compromised VPN and lateral movement example. So this is one of those incidents where every minute matters because once the attacker gets a foothold, they don't sit still. So the first is the detection where an alert triggers in the SIM or from the EDR platform. And on the paper, that does sound fast, and it is. The detections comes right away. But here's the honest part, an alert is not the containment, it's just the start of the clock. In most SOC, this is where the real work begins. Next is the analysis. Now, this is where analysts spend the most of the time working manually. Now, you're pulling the context from multiple places. So for example, in this case, there will be correlations through the threat intelligence to verifying is the IP address malicious or not? Is it from a high-risk country? Checking the user activity through the user logs, the user activity logs, the AD logs, then checking the VPN logs for any malicious behavior, and as well as checking the endpoint behavior. Maybe also looking at the firewall logs, where we are as the analyst trying to answer all these questions to even think, is this even real? And how confident are we? How bad it is? Is it even a true positive incident? So all these steps are being done at the part of the analysis. And usually this is the part which involves tool switching, pivots, screenshots, making notes, and then updating the incident record. So analysis becomes the bottleneck, not because analysts are slow, but because the workflow is manual. Now we reach the moment that matters the most, is the containment. Now this is where the analyst has to make a decision. Realistically, this is where someone will pick up a phone and call the customer to take the containment actions because of the nature of the incident. Now, again, because containment is in one button in one tool. So for example, in this case, to secure the user, you need to call the team who is responsible for the AD monitoring, which is to revoke the user access and reinforcing the authentication. Next, to secure the network network team needs to be involved to block the IP address on the firewall or on the web gateway. The endpoint team, the EDR team needs to be involved in terms of securing the endpoint to contain the host from the EDR. So now even when we know what to do, the effort is coordinating the quickly. But to execute across multiple systems, that also makes sure that we don't break something important. That's where it takes the time as well. So the time being spent on the analysis as well as on the containment. And that's why in the traditional SOC, or even in the best case scenario, the time to containment can be around 4 hours. Like we saw in the poll as well. And this is the best case scenario. I have seen it. It has taken more than 4 hours and sometimes days to even contain the incidents. Now, it's not because we didn't detect it. It's because the analysis, the coordination, the executing, the responses across the tools take time. So as a part of our incident management process, the next step comes to the investigation. Now, after the containment, we move into the investigation phase. This is where the analysts are doing the threat hunting in terms of the root cause. How did it happen? What else did the attacker touch? Was there any other persistence? Is there any other compromised accounts or host? And of course, we keep updating the incident record as we learn more. And the final stage of the incident process we reach to is the eradication. And then we finish the incident process where we are removing the malicious file, reversing any changes, and closing the case properly. Now, this part is still very manual, carefully detailed, and it takes up the time. And in many environments, this investigation plus eradication effort is typically around less than a day or maybe a day or 2 days, depending upon the scope of the incident. Now, here's the takeaway. If we can automate the first 3 steps, which is detection, analysis, and the initial containment actions using the autonomous SOC approach, then the time that we saw, which comes down to the 4 hours or the more than 4 hours of the first 3 phases of the incident process, it helps us to stop the bleeding right away. Now we can contain it under 5 minutes for high confidence scenarios, and that changes everything. Now, we still do the investigation and eradication manually because human needs to validate the scope and make smart decisions, but the threat is already contained. So the attacker doesn't get a time to move and spread it across the system. That's like stopping the bleeding. So at least that's done, and then we can move into the investigation and the eradication phases. So that's one of the differences that we see between the reactive, the manual SOC to the autonomous SOC. Now I'll just go over another second scenario, which is also extremely very common, like a malicious email combined with risky sign-in behaviors. Now, this is one of those incidents where the difference between minutes and hours really matters, because phishing can quickly turn into an account takeover, mailbox rules creations, internal phishing, and data access. So like we saw in the previous slide, this is where the incident shows up. We get to the alert. It can be either from the SIM or from the email or identity side, uh, or from any email platform or the identity protection. Now, it might be a malicious message indicator. It can be a suspicious sender or a risky access pattern like unusual location or the impossible travel. So this is where we get the detection. Next, same thing, we move to the analysis. This is where we separate the suspicion from certainty. Now, in the traditional workflow, this is the most time consuming, like we talked about in the previous slide, where analysts working manually to build a story and confirm what happened. So in this scenario, the investigation steps will revolve around checking was the email delivered and was it clicked? Was there any other user who received this email? Then from there, it will pivot to, for example, like checking the identity. Did the sign-in succeeded? Was there MFA challenged? Were there any token or session anomalies? And checking all these steps, trying to come up with the story, and then also checking, for example, like maybe was there any takeover behavior? Was there any new inbox rules created? Any unusual mailbox accesses seen? So a lot of cross-checking among the exchange from the AD and all those different tools, collecting the evidence and documenting it and updating the incident record. So even through the detection arrives quickly, like we saw, it's the confidence that takes the time to build when it's done manually. Now, the next phase of our incident process, which is the containment, and this is where things become very real and very fast. Now, because now we are not just analyzing, we are deciding whether to take the actions that can impact the user access and the business workflow. In many SOC, like we talked about, this would be the similar situation that it will be like picking up a phone. And now imagine if this is something happening 4 a.m. on the Sunday morning. Now, it won't be as easier or much less of a time to take the remediation actions, because again, this will involve multiple teams to be involved. So in this case, the containment would look like something locking down the account, which is revoking the sessions, resetting the credentials, cleaning up the mailbox, which is removing the malicious message, and then checking whether it did hit the other users or not, stopping the spread, blocking the sender domain and IPs. And when the team knows exactly what to do, the time adds up, coordinating among different teams to take all those coordinated actions with the approvals and documentation all happening at the same time. As we saw, this is where it will take most of our time, which is coming to the best case scenario. We talked about like 4 hours. Again, I have seen it. Sometimes it takes even more than that. And as a part of the incident process, the next still comes to the investigation. That is after the containment, we move into the investigation where analyst confirms the scope and the impact. Did the attacker access the other resources? Was any inbox rules created? Was there any persistent questions like attackers and internal phishing from the account or not? So this is the deeper work where again our analyst will drive, because it requires the judgment and the context. And then finally, the eradication phase, the cleanup phase, where we undo whatever the attacker changed, remove any persistence, reverse any suspicious mailbox configurations, and bring account back to a known good state. So we tighten the control on the same trick can't be repeated, capturing the timeline and finalizing the write-ups. And in many cases, the work is completed within the days and depending upon the scope. So same thing, if we talk about the AI-powered or autonomous SOC, now here's the game-changing part where we talk about the first 3 phases, we can bring it to the containment along with the containment under the 5 minutes. Now, the first 3 steps where they are most repeatable and automated, where the analyst was going between different tools, trying to make up a story to come up with is this even really malicious. through the AI analysis and with the mesh network integrated with all the things, helps us to come up with the enriched information, email and sender information through our threat intelligence platform, correlating to the identity risk events, calculating the severity and confidence, and then updating the incident record. And when confidence is high, executing pre-approved containment actions immediately. So this is where it brings us to, we're not waiting for hours for manual pivots and coordination. We can contain the account and stop the campaign in under 5 minutes for high confidence thresholds. And the same thing, the humans will do the investigation and eradication phases, but they're doing it after the threat is contained. And this is the pattern you must have noticed in both the examples, that automate the repeatable early steps, enrich the information, which can help to contain fast, and let the analyst focus on much deeper work. So, all right, so those two examples show the impact in real terms, same type of incidents, but completely different outcomes in terms of the containment. Now, the natural follow-up question is, what actions are actually happening in the first few minutes? What does an autonomous SOC do to stop the threat and not just creating the ticket? Now, this is where the self-healing capabilities come in, which is pre-approved changes, control response capabilities that can trigger immediately when risk is high. Now, think of it as the SOC moving from observing to correcting in real time. Like we talked about few greens in the previous slide, which is like isolating the endpoint in seconds to stop the spread, forcing the step-up authentication or revoking the user session, removing the high confidence malicious emails, blocking high severity IOCs, which is blocking IPs, domains, can be hashes, and etc. And all of these executing any other automated remediation workflows that are already approved and tracked. So instead of waiting for manual coordination across the tools, the environment can take the first safe action right away, and the analyst will validate, the investigate, and drive the eradications with all the pressure off. So if we do this right, outcomes becomes measurable. Now that we have talked about how an AI-powered SOC works, now let's translate it into what it looks to the leadership. What changes when we move from manual SOC workflows to automation and controlled autonomy? The first thing is that we have been talking about time to containment. Now, this is the biggest operational shift. We're talking about moving from hours and sometimes days to under 5 minutes for high confidence scenarios. And that's not just a metric, it's the difference between we contained it early versus we confirmed it after it spread. Fast containment breaks the attack chain and reduces the business disruptions. Second, and this is the pain point I have personally lived in the SOC, which is time to analyze. So in the manual workflow, even after an alert fires, analysts lose time doing all the steps. So with the AI helping doing the analysis, it helps to reduce the time to analyze. So with the automation and AI-assisted correlation, analyst time drops because when the incident arrives, it's already enriched with identity context, the endpoint details, or related activity and stitched to a one story. So instead of spending time building the case, analysts spend time making the decisions, and that directly minimizes the risk. And third is the analyst efficiency. Now, when we remove the repetitive work, copy pasting of the evidences, manualing enrichment, now the analysts don't just work faster, they work better. So that's how you can dramatically get more throughput with the same team while also reducing the burnout and improving the consistency. And fourth, the cost of the incidents. Now, not cost in this case is like the downtime, the recovery efforts, and the business interruptions. So when you contain faster and shorten the incident life cycle, incidents are smaller and less disruptive. Now that's where the measurable ROI comes from: fewer major events, shorter disruptions, and less all hands on deck responses. So if you boil it down, faster analysis plus faster containment results, all this in minimize risk and reduce the incident impact. So now the next question is usually, what concerns do you still have about implementing this safely? But I also know the moment we talk about the autonomous responses, there's usually a yes, but in everyone's head. So let's pause for a quick check-in. I've been talking for a very long time. So what's your biggest concern about implementing autonomous response? You can drop your questions in the chat and we'll go over for some of them to see.
Thanks, Imran. So while we are waiting for some of the questions to come into the chat, I can go ahead and get us started. So I think one of the first questions I had is, what is the biggest misconception you see about the autonomous SOC?
So that's a great question, and I have often come across this, the misconceptions, and I always hear about this, that if the system responds on its own and with no human control, it's like a black box making risky decisions. But in reality, what we're talking about, the autonomy in the SOC is a controlled autonomy. It's not like single on-off switch. It's the progression that we decide, the steps that we followed, or the steps that we talked about before, like what actions are allowed, what are the safe, confident conditions, and with all those approvals, and also like with what audit and rollbacks. So the autonomy is so what we talk about is the misconception that if we give all the control to the AI or the automated steps, we will lose control. So that's not true, because we take like a phase approach, so that we are only taking the high confidence decisions, and rest, as we talked about, we have the humans in the loop, the analyst in the loops, which will help to take the better and right decisions. So, all
Okay.
right, I think that's great. We'll go over further questions as we go along. So just wanted to touch base a bit. So I'll move to the next one, which is the steps in terms of readiness and guardrails. So now this is a quick readiness check slide, which is like just count how many you can answer yes. So for example, to begin with, like, do you have an EDR or XDR coverage across most endpoints? Ideally 80% or more. Are you ingesting identity logs into the SIM? For example, like your Azure AD or Okta, identity risk is important in the incident story. Do you have any API integrations between tools so response actions can be executed reliably and not manually? And you can measure your current MTTR, which is mean time to resolve accurately today. So if you checked like 3 or more, you're ready to start. You're at a good place. And if you're not at 3 yet, there's still a great takeaway. So your next best step is to strengthen the coverage and connectivity first, because autonomy without visibility is where the risk lives. So the next question becomes, what's the practical path to get the value fast without boiling the ocean? So here's a quick and a simple 90-day plan. Now, this is the rollout approach that works in terms of like value early, control the risk. This is like quick guide, but in real, it takes more than it's a 90-day roadmap, but it definitely takes a lot. It took us years to come up with the stable autonomous SOC. So just as a quick turnaround, so we'll go over this 90-day roadmap. So the first thing is define the baselines. Now, this is where you audit your current MTTR, mean time to resolve, mean time to respond, and the alert volume. Then you map your tools, APIs, and then identify the top 5 use cases where automation will actually reduce the time and effort. Now, the goal here is clarity. to just have an understanding of what you can automate first and how you will measure the success. So that's about like first 30 days. The next 30 days would be talking about quick wins. So like if you implement the automated enrichment, so see how does it look when every time the alert arrives with the context. Then slowly you introduce the risk-based prioritizations where the analyst focus on what matters first. Now, this phase is about cutting the manual work out of the workflow without changing the response authority yet. And the last 60 to 90 days is the autonomous pilot, where I would recommend like picking one low risk use case and then deploy it with the human in the loop. Meaning automation build the case and recommends the action and analysts approve until confidence is proven. So now a key piece here is the guardrails, now such as governance on the use of AI, anonymizing the data. And I remember when we were on the journey of our autonomous SOC, we saw a lot of issues. I'll talk about few. For example, we saw like AI hallucinations where it's like endless loops, the multiple lines, the agents fighting, not knowing where to stop. So, but this is the journey that you go through as a part of reaching to the level of the autonomous SOC. So once that pilot demonstrates the faster containment with safe controls, you expand from there, like use case by use case, by defining the thresholds, defining the safeguards and the confidence, and then the auditability built in. So the message here is autonomy is not a leap, and it's a controlled progression. And that brings us to the bigger shift that is happening in the SOC operations and the direction SOCs are moving, that is smarter and the autonomous SOC. Now we are moving from reactive to proactive, not just responding to alerts, but anticipating and interrupting the attacker's path earlier. Now, from manual to automated, which is removing repetitive work, so response isn't limited by human bandwidth, and from assisted to autonomous, where high confidence actions happen fast with all the guardrails and the transparency and the audit all built in. And I want to be clear, and this isn't about replacing the analyst, which is the bigger questions all the time. It's about giving them their time back. So instead of spending hours stitching the context together, spending the time on what humans do best, judgment, threat hunting, and driving the response strategies. So the analyst moving towards more of trusted advisor's role in threat hunting and the deeper investigations. So as we know now with all the AI and all the things happening, the attackers are already operating at the machine speed. The only way to consistently contain in minutes is to let the SOC operate with the machine speed as well. And with that, it brings me to the end of our webinar. I hope everybody enjoyed it. I know I've been talking for a long time, but thank you everyone. And I'll hand it over to Diana to go over if there are any questions in the chat that we can go through.
Yep. So thank you, Simran. We have one question here, and I can definitely share that with you. And I have a question too. So the first question from our audience is there one single AI, or does each separate tool have its own AI?
So the way that we have built our autonomous SOC, so we are using like 3 different LLMs, but keeping one as the primary and the others as the fallback, so that it's not like dependent on one thing. So we are correlating all the information and coming up with the best decision. That's the correlating the information and come up with the best, I would say, the incident analysis.
Okay. Okay, all right. And I think one of the questions that I had, like from a strategic perspective and even from an executive level, when people are talking about autonomous SOC, the question is, does, going down this path introduce any new risk to the business? Are there potentials for disruptions, for false positives, and things like that? So what can you tell a nervous executive about, going down this journey towards an autonomous SOC?
Yeah, no, definitely. And I know I do come across this nervousness, across the teams about like, okay, we enable the automation, but what if there is a false positive? So the way, like we talked about in the slides, that we don't just go directly from, one step to the end, which is basically like containing everything. So when we are trying to make it safe and with the confidence, we implement all the autonomy in stages, like with the guardrails. Now, we don't start with like full auto. We start with AI assisted and human approved workflows. So the beginning would be the automation enriches, and once we gain the confidence that yes, this is the, if you only take the containment actions if it's a very high malicious IP address, or the user activity is highly malicious, then only take the containment actions. So then we slowly, once the confidence is proven, we move from monitoring phase to conditional autonomy for low risk, high confidence actions. For example, I would take a few examples I've been talking about, like revoking the sessions or isolating the workstations and blocking the high severity IP addresses. And with all this, we also make sure that each and every action is auditable and it's scoped, and everything is in the incident ticket, so that the customer or the organization has the full visibility and they don't feel like they're losing control. So we're taking like the full approach and gaining the confidence and then going towards implementing those. I think
Good.
that
Yeah.
answers the question. And
Yes, it does. And I feel like, you know, as organizations start to adopt more autonomy, more AI, this is going to be the future. So we just need to give the confidence that, the process that we've developed will work, and, it will save them time and money and resources. Okay. All right. Great. There's no other questions in the chat, so I think we are going to be ready to wrap up. So to close, I'll leave you with this. The future of the SOC isn't about removing humans. It's about elevating them, reducing the noise, accelerating the containment, and designing systems that operate at machine speed while preserving the human judgment. If today's session resonated with you, we are happy to continue this conversation offline. Just feel free to reach out to us. Thank you very much for your time today, and have a great afternoon.
thank you, everyone.
Thank you.